Thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. It's a real privilege to be here, all the way from Wales to talk to you. It's unusual, I think, for Wales to get a morning session at an event like this, so we're really pleased about that. I think I moved to Wales about 12 years ago, and I found when I moved to Wales that the Welsh Government was already ahead in its thinking on lots of these matters around social issues and procurement. It's a small place. I think Wales is around the size of Greater Manchester in terms of its population. We are blessed with a lot of government. We have 22 local authorities, so we have an awful lot of small organisations. And I think that's one of the reasons why things can work in Wales, because each organisation is quite small, can't do things on its own, and we really do have to work together. So as a person working in procurement policy, I know all the other procurement officers around Wales in all the different sectors, and we can work together on projects to make things happen. So I think that's really helpful. Yes, I have got the right set. Marvellous. So I'm not going to go into this slide, and it also needs that before this goes onto the website, I'll update those figures because that's an old slide there. But obviously, we know about the problem of slavery. We're here to talk about it today. And I think within Wales, when we first started thinking about this code of practice, there was already an established anti-slavery leadership team in Wales, led by our anti-slavery coordinator, which is cross-sectoral. It works right across Wales, and I think that was something that was already driving a lot of training. We trained thousands of people, frontline staff, on spotting the signs of slavery in Wales. So the code came along when we'd already got an established network, and I sit on that leadership team, and that really helps support the work that I'm trying to do as well. But the other thing to say is that we'd already in Wales been looking very carefully, particularly in the construction industry, prompted by issues raised by construction unions, at issues of employment practices that fall short of illegal activity and human rights abuses and slavery, but are on the area of unlawful or unethical employment practices, things like blacklisting of unionised workers and those raising issues around health and safety, things like false self-employment or use of umbrella agencies or zero-hour contracts in a way which is unfair, where the balance of power really ends up with workers that are insecure in their work and in their jobs and conditions. So we'd already produced some guidance on that. We had some procurement advice notes. And one of the reasons why we were anxious to produce our code of practice, not just looking at slavery, but actually across the spectrum of employment practices, was that we found that even though these things are in place, this guidance was in place, there was plenty of evidence that it wasn't really being complied with. So we looked at the issue of modern slavery when the Modern Slavery Act came in. We thought, what should we do in Wales? A very small portion of organisations fall under the commercial organisations, over 36 million in Wales. There are loads of public bodies, as I've already said, lots of medium-sized small firms, but we felt we really all had a part to play. But we wanted to draw that together so that there's not a cut-off where illegal activity stops. We've already heard about problems when issues have been raised with the police in the past. And there's still that question, is it a crime? No. Well, what do we do? Well, actually, we need to work with the police forces, and we are in Wales, to think about signposting some unlawful practices and making sure that other issues get dealt with. Because what is a practice at the moment which is unlawful can easily slip into illegal and slavery practices and then kind of back out again. There is no hard and fast line between the two. And I think one of the lines I always say is, if you don't know what's happening in your supply chain, it could be slavery. The final point on that last slide, of course, is that in Wales, it's quite important that we focus on the way people are employed, because although we have, right through the economic downturn, had similar levels of employment, our pay is quite low. So there's a lot of focus at a political level on improving the lives of working people in Wales across the board. So, why are we looking at this from procurement? And I think, it's fair to say that there are problems with dealing with this issue just through enforcing current laws. These are endemic problems, particularly in the construction industry, particularly around employment practices. And we have minimal resources to actually tackle them. At a police event I went to this week, once somebody said, we're never going to arrest our way out of this problem. And that's absolutely true. And procurement is a powerful lever. In fact, everybody wants procurement to solve everything. When you work in public procurement, you find any sort of problem in society, I know, let's get public procurement to sort it out, ask questions and deal with it. So traditional procurement then, I think, has focused more on quality of products and services, maybe really focused on safety, particularly that's a big success in the construction industry, and environmental factors, of course, are important. But for some reason, we've kind of ignored workers. So we've worried a lot about the quality of our chickens and their health and safety, but very little about the people who are looking after manufacturing and processing chickens. That's an example I like to use. And why is that? It's curious, but it's true. I think we've focused a lot on achieving cost savings, and certainly in the public sector, one way that's been seen to achieve that is through outsourcing and then not worrying too much about a race to the bottom on terms and conditions. And then, of course, the terribly poor contract management that we see across the board, but particularly in the public sector, where we have quite low numbers of people devoted to that particular thing. But with procurement, of course, we've got a big opportunity. With the procurement process, you can intervene at every stage. Firstly, you can just simply signal that we care about something, producing a code of practice, telling our suppliers about it, lets them know that we're interested, and that in itself is quite powerful. Then we can set standards before we even issue a procurement notice and say this is, no point working with us unless you meet these criteria. And then we can ask questions, and that helps to identify the good and the less good performers based on their answers. Having let the contract, then we can manage that contract through the terms and conditions that we put in. Absolutely crucial. If you haven't put a condition in your contract which says, I can investigate workforce-related issues through the supply chain, then you might find it very difficult to get in there and do that. You put it in, if there's a problem, you can deal with it. You can actually get in there and talk to workers and sort stuff out. So simple things like just adding good contract clauses into procurement is really helpful. And we've drafted some for people to use. And of course, in the public sector, if you can make a link between better employment practices and service quality, then you can ask those questions specifically and lawfully under EU rules. And I think the final point that I didn't put on there is actually, once you've let a contract, that's another opportunity then to work in partnership with your supplier to take them beyond what is contractually an obligation into working with you collectively to improve practices. So in short, the code is about signing up to the fact that people matter, that we have to make sure we have the right balance of power between employer and employee to ensure that people aren't exploited. And that we should enforce some standards. We trade things off when we do commercial deals, obviously, price against cost and quality and timescales. We shouldn't be trading off minimum standards of employment and people's lives. So what is the Code of Practice? It was published in March last year. It has 12 commitments, which are covering those areas that are up there. And those commitments all just fit on 2 sides of A4. So unusually for a government document, it doesn't go on for pages and pages. You have to read it in English and Welsh, but even so, it's still fairly short. So it's a voluntary code, but all those in receipt of public money in Wales are expected to sign up. And people scratch their heads at that point. But actually, the way I describe that is, you're expected to sign up because this is public money. And with that public money comes an obligation that you behave lawfully and ethically, and that you ensure that that money is spent in that way. So the obligation is a moral one, and it follows the money that's coming from the public purse. It's voluntary because it doesn't lend itself to a do minimum compliance tick box approach. Several of the commitments in the code are quite challenging, and they're things that you need to develop and work on over time. It's also something that it applies differently in different sectors and different organisations, so a one-size-fits-all approach to dealing with the commitments doesn't necessarily work. So that's why I have to keep arguing for it to remain voluntary. And the jury's out on that one. If it starts to make a difference, then hopefully we'll continue to have that voluntary approach. If not, ministers in Wales are quite clear that they will think about legislating. So far, and anyone can sign up, by the way, you don't have to be based in Wales. Any organisation, everyone in this room is part of an organisation you could all sign up to. That would be great. So far, we've got actually, when I wrote this, it was 120. We're now up to 130 organisations signed up. And that doesn't sound very many in a year, and I agree, and I would like it to be a lot more than that. But that represents around about roughly half public sector bodies and half private sector. I'm in a very small team, extremely small, and my focus has been on getting public sector bodies not just signed up, but putting some of the infrastructure and materials in place behind the scenes to help people to actually implement the code of practice. So we've got some very big local authorities, and in signing up, most of these organisations have signed up at their most senior level. So cabinet committees of local authorities, boards of companies, and then they've started to put some infrastructure on the whole. Particularly the public bodies have started to put some processes in place to make sure that they can actually deliver against the commitments in the code. So just very quickly then, the 12 commitments, the first two, and I noticed what Lola said about lack of a policy. Well, the first one is about having a policy. It's important to state what your policy is as an organisation. And as part of that, and one which I knew would be quite tricky, but it should be simple, but it isn't, appointing someone in the organisation who is the champion of that policy and is prepared to take responsibility for it across the organisation, not just in commercial or HR, but in every area of the operation. Number two is about having a whistleblowing policy, which most organisations have, but does that cover employment-related issues? And more importantly than that even, is there a process for what happens if someone raises these issues? And we're working on that a bit at the moment. Number three is around training. Number four is about asking the right questions in your procurement process. Number five is about contract management. We were just listening to a point about that earlier on, about how the commitment is one that, again, doesn't lend itself to tick box. It is, if you're pressing your suppliers, make sure you're committing to saying you're not going to be pushing suppliers to the point at which they are kind of incentivised to exploit labour. And that's not something you can say, yes, done. It's something that people need to be trained and really think about in the public sector. So number six is a key one around, you sign up to the code, we need to get our suppliers to sign up. So I'm kind of hoping, I haven't actually plotted the figures yet, but I'm hoping we're starting to reach that exponential upturn point now. There's been quite a lot of people signing up in the last couple of weeks, but in theory, we should start to go up once every organisation that's signed up is asking their suppliers to do the same. Number seven is the really tricky one about looking at your supply base as a whole. For big public bodies, that's really scary. Working out where the risks are and delving down and trying to find out, and actually exploring in more detail what's happening in those supply chains. Very challenging for public bodies. That's something we're going to try and work on across Wales and not with individual organisations. 8 and 9 are our hard-hitting ones that businesses quite often don't like. It says, we will ensure there's no blacklisting in our supply chain. We will ensure that there is no false self-employment or unfair use of employment agencies or zero-hour contracts. That causes a great deal of worry to some organisations. How can we ensure it? And my response, particularly in the construction industry, is in the same way that you ensure that everybody on your site is wearing a hard hat, you have to put processes in place. They may be difficult to do, but over time we need to put those things in place and checks. Number 10 is the weakest commitment of all. It's about considering paying a living wage. We've got affordability issues around that in Wales, with some of our local authorities still not able to pay all directly employed staff above the Living Wage Foundation's living wage. But that's something that we are working towards over time. And then number 11 is the key one. That's the one which fits with what Lola was saying earlier on. We are committing to publishing, all organisations that sign up to the code, publishing an anti-slavery statement. I can't say that they've all done so yet, but certainly they're on the way to doing that. So, as I've said, it's voluntary, and we must sign up at a senior level. It is about having a proportionate approach. It's about due diligence, as I said, and not compliance. And this is the slide I was after. Signing up to the code, and this is quite unusual for business. They're nervous about signing up. I think it's called a code of practice. It sounds a bit scary, like you're going to come and hit me with it further down the line. But I'm trying to get the message across and improve our messaging to get people to understand this is just about starting on a journey. It's saying these things matter. These 12 commitments are things that we aspire to and we want to deliver, and this is the process that we are going to put in place to get there. So, and I think just the phrase that we can't all be perfect, none of us are, None of us probably can put our hands up and say, at this point in time today, all the clothes that we're wearing, none of them have been put together by children or people in poor conditions. But we can all take steps to improve the way we're doing things, and that's the spirit of the code. We also ask organisations to track their progress, that they've signed up, and what they're doing with the TISC report website. You can read a bit more about that when you look at the slides. I'm not going to go into that in detail now. But importantly, and this is me reaching the end now, we've put quite a lot of infrastructure behind the Code of Practice. So if you go onto the website and download it, you can also download 4 guides which cover those areas, and a really useful one which actually has example questions to use in procurement and example contract conditions that you can cut and paste into your contracts and tenders, if that would be useful to you. To make this happen across Wales, I've set up an informal email community of practice group of public sector bodies. We share progress on things. Somebody will say, I've done some work on the whistleblowing process. Share it. We meet up and we actually work together. Someone else has produced a policy. Let's have a look, and maybe that would be useful for us to use. So we're kind of sharing the work out amongst us around Wales. We've produced a little animation which kind of sells what we're doing on the Welsh Government website. If you Google YouTube Welsh Government Code of Practice, that will come up. We've recently launched an e-learning module. I think it's a bit clunky, but everyone loves it. Half an hour. You can get that, again, free access. Anyone can get it. It's on the NHS website. And also importantly, we've linked to our spend. We collect spend data from public sector bodies across Wales, so we know who we spend all our money with, and we've got a link between that data set and the TISC report, and that over time is going to build up a bit more shared knowledge about who's contracting with who and have they got statements in place, that sort of thing. So that is what we're doing on the code.